Turkish revolutionaries found themselves in conflict with both their Greek neighbors and fellow countrymen in Istanbul. They faced the dual challenge of waging a war while simultaneously managing a rebellion. A victory in this struggle would signify ultimate freedom. In response to the crisis, the Ottoman government in Istanbul sought the assistance of a Circassian hero named Rory, a determined opponent of Mustafa Kemal and the rebellion. Rory characterized Kemal's followers as malevolent unionists and Freemasons who needed to be suppressed. Consequently, he allied himself with the Sultan to combat the nationalists, initially alongside British forces. However, the situation shifted when the British recognized the extensive effort required to effectively suppress the burgeoning revolution. War-weary and reluctant to provoke their domestic populace, the British leadership began to consider collaboration with their Greek allies. It became evident that Turkey was home to two entrenched governing authorities, one in Istanbul and the other among the nationalists in Ankara. The Western powers feared that, if left unchecked, the rebels would soon overthrow the Ottoman government. A scenario that posed significant concerns given that the war's origins were rooted in the nationalists' aversion to foreign oversight. While the Sultan and his officials could be managed, Kemal and his followers presented a different challenge. This created a compelling reason for nations like Britain to support the Istanbul government, even if that support necessitated the involvement of the Greeks. By the summer of 1919, Greek troops had already arrived in Smyrna, leading to confrontations with the local Turkish population. During the period when the Greeks were actively seeking to expand their territorial control, they faced intense nationalist opposition. As autumn approached in 1920, Greek forces advanced further into Anatolia, aiming to compel the Turks to agree to the previously unsuccessful treaty of which was intended to initiate the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire. This treaty only served to exacerbate nationalist sentiments, as the nationalists believed they had a cause worth defending. The conflict between the two factions escalated on January 9, 1921, with the commencement of the First Battle of Inyon, where Turkish forces successfully halted the Greek advance, forcing them to retreat just 2 days after the battle began. It is widely believed that the triumph of the Turkish troops in this engagement played a crucial role in the ratification of the Turkish Constitution of 1921, which occurred less than 2 weeks later. Subsequently, the London Conference convened, allowing the Allies to deliberate on their proposed responses to the evolving situation in Turkey. Despite their determination to pressure the nationalists into signing the treaty, the Allies faced continued Turkish resistance. The Ankara government rejected the notion of negotiating with the Istanbul government, deeming the treaty as a basis for discussions unacceptable. By March, the Greeks initiated the Second Battle of Inyon, only to be outmatched once more by the Turkish defenders. Meanwhile, alliances had been formed between the nationalists and the Italians, French, and Soviet Union, leading to attempts to modify the treaty. Severus was presented by the Union. Greece, having resisted the Greeks, found their path leading towards the Sakarya River, accompanied by another army prepared for conflict. The river's location was situated less than 100 meters from the rebellious Turks in Ankara, compelling Mustafa Kemal's forces into a direct engagement. The Battle of Sakarya endured for a grueling 3 weeks, culminating in the Greeks being forced into a retreat as the autumn season approached. This marked their final attempt to directly assault the Ankara government, as their focus shifted to safeguarding the territories they had successfully acquired, such as Smyrna. With the Union reluctant to provide manpower in their aid and the Soviets supporting the Turks, Greece's resolve to continue the war was waning. The Western nations' support for their Greek allies amounted to little more than a proposal for a revised version of the Treaty of Severus, which was ultimately rejected as it contradicted the principles upheld by the Grand National Assembly. The ongoing stalemate raised the question of why the Turks had not initiated their own offensive. Agreements had been established with significant Western nations, leaving only the Istanbul government and the Greeks for the nationalists to confront, with the former showing less eagerness for conflict. Meanwhile, the Greeks, adopting a more defensive posture around Smyrna, had not yet called off the war. Consequently, Mustafa Kemal, now the commander-in-chief, began to transform his revolutionary forces into a formidable army capable of launching a decisive strike against their British-supported neighbor. The preparations culminated in what would be known as the Great Offensive, commencing with the Battle of Dunlupana on August 26, 1922, which would unfold over a 4-day confrontation. The forces led by Mustafa Kemal and the Greek commanders were already experiencing fatigue and demoralization. They were under the leadership of a man named Hatson, who was perceived by many as at least somewhat mentally unstable. The Turkish offensive swiftly dismantled the Greek defense force, compelling the occupiers to retreat in a disorganized manner towards Izmir. The nationalists pursued their fleeing adversaries with renewed vigor and enthusiasm. In the ensuing weeks, Greece's territories in Turkey fell rapidly, akin to a line of dominoes, until all were once again under Turkish control. Observing the evacuation of their Greek allies, the British began to reconsider the necessity of their own military intervention, despite the strong public opposition in Britain to engaging in another foreign conflict. Meanwhile, the government led by David Lloyd George sought to decisively address the GNA fighters. Mustafa Kemal himself played a pivotal role in facilitating negotiations at MNA, which, despite significant reluctance from the Greeks, ultimately led to the armistice of MNA on October 11, 1922. This agreement mandated the withdrawal of Greek troops from eastern Thrace and imposed temporary limitations on the Turkish forces, which by that time was solely comprised of nationalists. As the Istanbul government and the Ottoman Empire had effectively ceased to exist following the Sultan's abdication under pressure from nationalist forces, the conclusion of the Turkish War of Independence and the subsequent greco-turkish war was marked by the Treaty of Lausanne, signed on July 24, 1923, in Switzerland. This treaty established the new Turkish state as the successor to the Ottoman Empire, and it would take an additional year for the agreement to be fully implemented. Following 8 months of negotiations that resulted in 143 articles and a consensus regarding the Turkish Straits, the establishment of Turkey's new borders facilitated regional trade and more. The agreement marked the emergence of the Republic of Turkey, succeeding the defunct Ottoman Empire. Although the new Turkish state was entirely independent and self-governing, it was compelled to relinquish several territories previously held by the Ottoman Empire. The public debts that had been the responsibility of the Ottoman Empire were apportioned between Turkey and the former Ottoman territories. As the articles of the agreement were finalized, Turkey increasingly gained recognition as a legitimate and sovereign state on the global stage. On October 29, 1923, Mustafa Kemal officially proclaimed the founding of the Republic of Turkey, subsequently becoming its first elected president. In 1934, the newly formed Turkish parliament conferred upon President Mustafa Kemal the title of Atatürk. This esteemed revolutionary and leader was honored as the father of the Turks for his pivotal role in establishing a fully independent and sovereign Turkish state. He transitioned from a military figure within the Ottoman Empire to a celebrated hero, confronting the very empire he once served for the benefit of his nation and its people. Atatürk, alongside the courageous Turkish populace, engaged in a struggle against all adversaries that threatened their quest for ultimate freedom, ultimately achieving victory.